Okay, I have Stephen Gumpel here. Stephen Gumpel is my uncle, and I am interviewing him for the project that we're doing in class. Uncle Stephen, your first question is, how old were you on September 11th, 2001, and what were you doing that morning before you heard about what was happening in New York City and Washington, D.C.?
Good morning, Patrick. Yeah, I was, it's easy to remember, I was 48 years old, which is 20 years ago this coming September. And I was president of a medium-sized company in North America. I was in my small headquarters in our Terrytown office overlooking the Hudson River that day. And it was a normal work day. I think it was a blue sky Tuesday morning. And honestly, I always like to have the radio on. So I was listening to Imus in the morning on the radio in New York, out of New York City, which I did for years, just as kind of background noise.
I think that's probably how millions of people heard about it. That's how my father heard about it. He was listening to Imus. So that was actually part of the second question. How did you find out about the plane crashes? So you heard it directly from Imus on his very famous long-running New York City radio show. What were your initial thoughts when you first realized what they were talking about?
Well, as Imus often did, he called the very long-time sportscaster Warner Wolf, who was a big sports guy in the country. And he lived in Manhattan, and they had a personal relationship. So he called him almost every day when there was some interesting sporting events going on in the country, and they would banter and talk about real sports and tease them and all that sort of stuff. So I was listening to them, and but all of a sudden, it was not about that. Quite suddenly, I had learned earlier that Warner Wolf lived actually in the then brand new financial district, residential area in Lower Manhattan, on the west side, on the Hudson River. And quite suddenly, Warner was quite shocked, obviously, in his comments, saying that something had just happened right across the street at the World Trade Center. It was very bad, and he thought that a small plane might have run into one of the towers.
Yeah. So he kind of saw it right out of his window?
That's what he said. That's right.
Yeah. Gotcha. How did this affect the rest of your day? Did it change your immediate schedule and plans you had for the rest of that day?
It did. I was responsible for people around the country, and my office staff and our headquarters was modest at the time. We had about 5 or 6 people in the office, one of whom was traveling around the port of New York since we did ship inspections, steamship inspections. And so I told everybody after we had gathered around a radio and listened for about 15 or 20 minutes that they should go home right away. I decided that something highly unusual and probably bad was going on. And none of my people lived in New York City, but I thought they should probably be home with their kids and their loved ones, because I just had a very bad feeling about it. And I, too, wanted to get home. And they were talking about sending kids home from school. So some of them had kids in school, and I wanted to get them going. So we closed the office within about an hour.
Gotcha. How was your office closed for a while after that?
I think only about 3 or 4 days, maximum. It may have been just 2 or 3, but yeah, those days it was difficult to operate any kind of business remotely.
Yeah.
We didn't have, home computers were still relatively primitive, and you couldn't liaise so much on a business sense with, our worldwide organization based in Europe.
Yeah. What stands out to you the most about the weeks following the attacks?
Yeah. Well, in a strange way, there was a sort of relief, only because our instant thoughts were really, really bad. The instantaneous thoughts, I think, of most people were that we were under a greater attack. in the United States. So immediately, or that is within a couple of days, we felt, I think generally, that an immediate attack was probably not going to occur, that this might have been a one-off, very bad day.
Yeah. The last question here is kind of like a multi-part question. So I'll read the main part of the question, and then I'll tell you the individual parts that I would ask you to speak to. So based on your experiences and your opinion, how did the events of 9/11/2001 affect the following? So the first category is just your personal or your daily life. Did it change after this?
Well, I think I guess I have to confess that I got very caught up very soon after in the media and government hype about who the bad guys were. Mm-hmm. And I ran with that for a very long time, and I'm talking a few years. But I think as more facts came out, facts that our government was never really, till today, was never fully honest about, I slowly kind of walked it backwards. And as bad as the individuals were who did the individual deed, it since then made me think of how and why historically certain groups in the world, and I don't mean just the Middle East, but generally why they've come to unhappy or very angry positions about Western countries and so on. And while individuals were truly bad for doing what they did, it's made me think as I get older about why lots of cultures, even within our own cultures in the United States, are not happy and hold real anger with our government and other Western governments around the world.
Gotcha. As someone who traveled and still travels a lot for work, how did it affect more unique experiences, such as travel, domestic or foreign, and other things like attending large events like sporting events or concerts and things like that?
Yeah, well, that's a little bit interesting, possibly. The day I came home, and my wife was at work too. She left immediately to come home too. She said to me when we saw each other right away, she said, "You said this would happen." And I had been working in the World Trade Center for 5 years, a little bit before this time. And I thought it was a real potential target. And I was always concerned about my security, being a world traveler for 46 years now. I'm just, I love people a lot. I love all the cultures and so on, but I can see certain dangers. And while I wouldn't call myself paranoid, I was always concerned about people coming to the U.S. and not just waiting to do damage to Americans or Westerners overseas. So that was an immediate thing that struck me, is that I was a little bit right that they finally came home here to attack us locally. So that's always colored me in the possibilities of what can be in the world.
Gotcha. I don't know. I'm sure I've told you this before, but the first thing I did that day, I didn't know that you had moved your office to Terrytown. So in my head, your office was in the World Trade Center. So right away, I was trying to call my mom, to find out if you were okay. That was that was my immediate response on that day. That stands out to me.
Oh, that's nice. I'd never heard you never mentioned that to me before.
And we couldn't get. I don't know if you remember, but it was hard to connect. The phone lines were so tied up because everyone was on the phone, and people didn't. I don't know if I had a cell phone then, so it was like a landline, and it was very hard to get to connect on a phone call that day.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, Lower Manhattan had phone line damage for about 3 to 5 years after that.
Wow!
Because all the old systems were just destroyed downtown, where there was a great linkage going to the multi-states right through Lower Manhattan. And my lawyer was down there, and he had to simply close his office because he couldn't talk to people for the next year, and he finally gave up and moved way uptown.
Wow.
Yeah.
So to kind of follow up on what you just said about how even before this attack, you always felt like there was a possibility of something like this happening. So this is kind of interesting. The next category is, how did this affect your sense of security? Did it change that feeling that you had in any way?
No, the same sense stuck with me forever until now. Not only when I fly, but just going anywhere. I could drive over a big bridge, like in the tri-state area. They're very big bridges. Can somebody hurt the bridge? In subways or other things like that, or indeed software attacks that we're seeing a lot of today. I've thought for many years that our water supply system, all the pumps and the computers that run them, will one day be attacked, and then we're going to have a very serious problem. So it doesn't, it hasn't gone anywhere. I've just learned to kind of chill out and control what I can control and not let it eat me up. I don't think about it all that much, but I'm aware of things like that.
Gotcha. My students and I discussed kind of the trade-off between national security and privacy. Do you feel like your privacy with respect to the U.S. government has changed at all? Well,
yeah, that's one of the toughest questions, and it's so good that you propose that to your class, because it's very serious. Since I was the youngest age that I can remember, the state license plate, and it may be the state logo, I'm not sure, but for the state of New Hampshire, says "Live free or die." And I always thought that was a little bit dramatic. And since then, I've wondered, is it really so dramatic? What would I do, or what should we all do if we were full and well and outwardly and openly attacked here at home? And I have a feeling that I would want to live free or die.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
My last question is there one thing that stands out the most about how life as a U.S. citizen has changed since then?
Yeah, I think there's no doubt. When I was sailing at sea on merchant ships and also flying around the world, meeting people everywhere, and people were very, very impressed automatically before I opened my mouth that I was an American. Everyone wanted to be an American. Back in 1972, I was in Russia as a teen, and the young people my age wanted my blue jeans. They wanted something American. They wanted to be American. They wanted everything American, and that went on for still decades after that. I know that from other contacts I had, and I think the bloom is off the rose a little bit about that. But still, people do want to be Americans. They want to be more like Americans. But I think we're not in such a held in high favor by so many people anymore. I find that to be very unfortunate.
Yeah. Gotcha. Before we started the interview, you said you had a couple interesting anecdotes about all of this to share.
Yeah. They're kind of terrifying and skin crawling in a way, but they're just regular incidences that occurred. Well, not regular. The first one's not regular. The second one is, sorry. So the first one, it was about 3, maybe even 5 years after that day, on September 11th. And it suddenly dawned on me. I had a flash that I saw one of the 2 planes flying down the Hudson River, and it was hugging the river. It must have been just a couple hundred feet above the river, and it flew over the Tappan Zee Bridge and then back down toward the water to stay low out of the radar sites of the airports. And I learned later that it went up and climbed up higher and came down into the city. And I just blanked so much out that day, I think, as a lot of people did. But so I recall that all those people on that plane went almost past my window.
Wow.
And I didn't realize it until some years later. It just hit me that they were there. And I said to myself, that is the strangest thing ever I've seen out my window. And for some weird reason, I didn't, it just blanked out. The other thing is kind of terrifying and makes my skin crawl when I think about it, but it's probably about also 3 to 5 years later. It may have even been 10 years later. I just don't remember, but I keep little keepsakes, little tchotchkes and so on, in a drawer in my armoire in my bedroom. I just collect things, coins from around the world and so on. And I went to a special meeting in New York City sponsored by the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey for maritime people. And I went. Well, I went into my drawer one day, years later, and there inside, under a pile of stuff, I pulled out a temporary ID badge that you just stick onto your suit lapel when you enter the World Trade Center to go up in this special elevator up to the upper floor,
yeah,
where this meeting room is. And it was dated 1 year, almost to the minute, before the World Trade Center was attacked.
Wow. September 11th, 2008, 40 something in the morning.
2000. That's right.
Yeah.
It was a little early, like 8:36, which
Wow.
is even more scary because by the time 840 something would have come up, I would have been up there.
No doubt.
And I was exactly there on one of the top floors, exactly a year earlier, and had these people plan their attack a year earlier, you and I wouldn't be talking today.
Wow. Yeah, that's a little skin crawling. I see what you mean by that. Well, selfishly, I'm glad it didn't happen a year earlier.
Thanks, Pat. Me too.
That's a hard thing to say I'm glad for, but you know what I mean.
I do know what you mean. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you for participating. I hope my students find your memories of this interesting. I'll post it for them to check out. And congratulations on your retirement.
Yeah, thanks, Pat. And I would say to the students, this happened 20 years ago. When I was their age, 20 years ago, it was like ancient history. It was like in the 1950s or something. And who paid attention to that, you know? But this was something that changed our country probably forever. And I would say, don't ever be afraid or be too lazy. Sorry to say that word. To be questioning your government or those you elected when you start voting, or what's around you. Look around you. If there's something strange there, say something. And you know that phrase, right? If you see something, say something. But that goes on in your daily life. And you'll save yourself and your families. And I don't mean just from threats. I mean everything in your life. It's your life. It's your world. Speak up and participate in it.
Good advice. Good life advice.
Patrick, take care. And to your students, take care. Huh?